Shalom, peace, and greetings. Today's video is going to be about Deuteronomy chapter 28, the truth they don't want you to know. Okay, so Deuteronomy chapter 28 is not about the transatlantic slave trade in the Americas. It is not. And we're going to focus on the curse they ignore in that chapter in order to fool blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans into thinking that they are cursed and using that as proof that they are Israelites. The question Deuteronomy 28 must answer. If this chapter is used as an identity test, the whole passage has to be handled honestly. Do the actual curses match the claim? The issue is not emotion. The issue is whether the text fits the doctrine being taught. Start where Moses starts. The curses are introduced as a covenant warning for disobedience. Deuteronomy chapter 28 verse 15 in the King James Version. But it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes, which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee. Key point. The passage says all these curses, not a cherry-picked slogan. The modern claim. Many street teaching groups identify Deuteronomy 28 with the transatlantic slave trade in the Americas. The claim says this: these curses identify blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans in the Americas. Here's what we're going to test, all right? The test asks this question: did the actual curse package happen the way the text says it would happen? A doctrine should not survive by ignoring the verses that do not fit. You understand? The curse they ignore. Right here. Moses describes a siege, famine, terror, and cannibalism. Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 53. And thou shalt eat the fruit of thine own body, the flesh of thy sons and of thy daughters, which the Lord thy God hath given thee, in the siege and in the straitness, wherewith thine enemies shall distress thee. This is not ordinary oppression. This is extreme siege starvation. Deuteronomy 28, verse 54. The verse describes a delicate man under siege pressure. Here's the verse. So that the man that is tender among you and very delicate, his eyes shall be evil toward his brother, and toward the wife of his bosom, and toward the remnant of his children, which he shall leave. Do not interpret verse 54 before reading verse 55. Because a lot of these brothers on the street misinterpret this verse, saying it's got something to do with single mothers. You can't make this stuff up. Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 55. Verse 55 explains what verse 54 means. So that he will not give to any of them of the flesh of his children, whom he shall eat, because he hath nothing left him in the siege and in the straitness, wherewith thine enemies shall distress thee in all thy gates. The context is siege starvation, not abandonment of fatherly responsibility. Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 56. The woman is placed in the same siege framework. So Deuteronomy 28 and 56 says, the tender and delicate woman among you, which would not adventure to set the sole of her foot upon the ground for delicateness and tenderness. Her eye shall be evil toward the husband of her bosom, and toward her son, and toward her daughter. Again, the passage is describing desperation, famine, and terror. Deuteronomy 28, verse 57. The verse says the curse happens secretly because of total want inside the siege. Deuteronomy 28:57. And toward her young one, that cometh out from between her feet, and toward her children which she shall bear, for she shall eat them. You see that? Eat them, for want of all things secretly, in the siege and straitness, wherewith thine enemy shall distress thee in thy gates. The repeated phrase matters, in the siege and straitness. So I ask you a question. When did this happen to so-called black people or African Americans and Negroes, Hispanics and Native Americans over here in the United States or in Central or South America? When did it happen? The text defines the scenario. The repeated context is not normal migration, ordinary poverty, or general slavery. It is a military siege. Enemies distress them in all thy gates. It is a famine-level desperation. They have nothing left. It includes the flesh of sons, daughters, and newborn children. That does not match the Americas as a total fulfillment claim. This is not a modern family curse, a serious correction to a harmful street doctrine claim. So here's the false street claim from the brothers whose name I'm not going to call, since some of their members think I need to use their name to get views. I'll just tell you that some of them wear purple and gold, some of them wear different colors. Here's their false street claim. They say that black women are single mothers because Deuteronomy 28 verse 54 cursed their men to abandon fatherly responsibility. What the text actually says, the man is trapped in a siege. He is afraid, starving, and hiding flesh from the family because there is nothing left. Do not turn siege horror into a weapon against women and children today. So I'm going to just show you that verse again right quick, then we come back to that page. These brothers were literally on the street saying, and toward the remnant of his children which he shall leave. They said that's the reason for single mothers in the United States of America. That is a lie. It has nothing to do with that. Nothing to do with that at all. All right. So let's get back down here. Now, the word leave must stay in context. Verse 54 cannot be ripped away from verse 55. He does not simply abandon his children. Verse 55 explains the crisis. He refuses to share the flesh of his children because there is nothing left in the siege. Context controls interpretation. Why the total fulfillment claim fails. The doctrine overreaches when it uses Deuteronomy chapter 28 as a modern ethnic identity test. The chapter contains a complete curse package, not just ships and captivity. The child cannibalism curse is explicit and severe. The text locates that horror inside siege and starvation conditions. That is crystal clear, y'all. There is no honest way to say all those curses came upon blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans in the Americas exactly as written. A better biblical standard. Let the passage speak before building doctrine from it. Read the whole chapter. If a doctrine depends on ignoring Deuteronomy chapter 28 verses 53 through 57, the doctrine needs to be challenged. Deuteronomy 28 was not the Transatlantic Slave Trade. Point blank, period. So here's our closing statement. The goal is not hatred. The goal is truth, context, and deliverance from false doctrine. Context beats slogans. Deuteronomy 28 verses 53 through 57 describes siege cannibalism. It should not be used to shame modern families or force a false identity doctrine. In other words, stop using that to say that black people are cursed in America. Stop using that to say Native Americans and Hispanics are cursed because of that, because it's not true. So with that, I'm going to say peace, shalom, blessings, have a good day. If you encounter these people on the street, online, wherever, remember these verses. If they take you to Deuteronomy 28, you take them straight to these verses and ask them, when did our people in America eat the flesh of their sons, daughters, and newborns? And when were the husbands and wives hiding the fact that they were eating the flesh from their husband or their wife? Have a good day.